Hello everyone and welcome to Heal a Sister. Heal a Sister is a show that aims to bring hope and restoration to the young woman. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the very sensitive topic of depression. My name is Amhalang Motlabi, and today on this show, we are joined by Thokozani Ndlovu, an associate psychologist. Thank you for being here, Thokozani.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Now, Thokozani, I don't want to assume that our audience knows what depression is, just because everybody's talking about it today. Perhaps that's, let's start there. What is depression and how can we identify it, and what is the impact that has had on young people?
All right. So depression is a mood condition, right? But I want us to start here on this issue of sadness, because I think it's tied very heavily with depression, right? So everyone experiences sadness. It's a normal emotion that we all have.
Yeah.
And now when sadness comes to a point where it becomes debilitating and impairs functioning for a prolonged period, then a person may have what's called a depressive disorder, right? So there's various types of depressive disorders, but for the context of what we're going to be talking about, I'd like us to focus on major depressive disorder, which in pop culture is usually what we term as depression. Okay. All right. So depression in this context would be a mood psychological condition where a person experiences extreme lows of mood and loss of pleasure in things. So it could be where a person is continuously sad, episodes spanning for over 2 weeks continuously, or when a person is experiencing loss of pleasure, that means things that they used to like to do, they then don't like doing. You know, your amu, you liked going to cycle, and all of a sudden you look at your bike and you're like, yo, I don't think I like this thing anymore.
I don't find pleasure there anymore.
Right. Yeah. And so now when it comes to a place where those low moods now affect functioning. So it can affect functioning in a number of ways, right? There's different types of functioning. You could have your practical functioning. Your practical functioning would be how your activities of daily living.
Okay.
Right. So chores, washing the dishes, going places you typically go, and then you find that the person doesn't do those anymore because of the debilitating moods.
Yeah.
Right? Functioning can be social, where a person used to be an extrovert, used to, go out a lot with friends and family and go to church and stuff like that, and all of a sudden they confine themselves to their room. They go into a recluse, they isolate themselves because of the debilitating moods. Functioning can also be conceptual in how a person uses their cognitive functions, right? Typically you find people with depression tend to forget a lot. You find they don't perform as well as they did in school. So you might find a young lady has grades that are dropping and so forth.
Okay, I was going to ask you next, how do we identify that someone has depression? But I think you've done, you've explained it, you've done a lot of work expounding on what it looks like. It's great sadness, but when you say sadness, does it always look like that? Is it possible that it's hidden? I might wear a mask that you don't see that I'm actually quite depressed, but I'm always smiling, I'm always happy, you don't realize it. In case it was a cry for help, you don't see it. Yeah, how often does that happen?
Absolutely, Amo. Masking, especially when it comes to depression, is something that occurs, I think, quite often, right? Because you might get into situation, you might find situations where a person is afraid of how they might be perceived because they're depressed, because there's a shame that it carries. Depression, remember, is a psychological condition, right? And so I think in trying to preserve then the self, it might be a person having to keep up with facades, so a person would then go out and be extroverted, but when they come home, perhaps the house is messy and disorganized because they just don't have the energy to clean it,
So I guess some people do know that they have depression. They know that they're struggling with a mental disorder. Is that right? Is that correct? Can I say that? Yes, that you know that you're struggling with a mental disorder. Is it possible that you might not know what you're struggling with?
Absolutely. I think, we all have got a base.
Okay.
We all know, okay, this is where I am when I'm happy. This is where I am when I'm sad.
Okay.
And for some people, like you mentioned, it's easy to see when you've gone below that base, meaning the sadness that you're experiencing, you can see, this sadness is more than what I'm used to. And I think because, we're all made different by God.
Yeah.
Some people find it easier to notice when they've gone below their base more than others, and so for other people, depression can manifest itself in various ways. So for some people, it could be, oh, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling empty, I'm feeling hopeless. For other people, it comes with what's called suicidal ideation, right? So thoughts of death, wanting to harm themselves through various ways, feeling like life has got no meaning, no purpose. And for other people, it presents itself somatically. So what that means is it shows up in how their body works, right? So you might find that someone is experiencing pains that they didn't know they had. You're experiencing aches, and then when you go to a doctor, they can't find anything physically wrong with you. But because of all of the pent up emotions that have been suppressed and are lurking,
Okay, it sounds very painful. Now, Mwari Tokozani, what are the causes? What kind of causes are they around depression?
There's a number of things that cause depression.
Yeah.
I think on the top of my mind, genetics. Yeah.
Okay.
I think much like diabetes,
Okay.
much like hypertension,
Oh,
depression, and other psychological conditions can be inherited.
Okay.
So you typically find that if you've got a parent or a family member that has a depressive disorder, it increases the likelihood of other people in that family getting a psychological disorder or depression.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes it's not the same thing, but you often find that it can be genetically passed down. Other causes can be social. So you find a person, let's say, is experiencing changes. Let's say they're moving to a particular place and they're not feeling welcome, and they're feeling isolated and alone. That could cause a significant amount
Environmental changes.
Other things could be still with big disruptions. So someone loses a job, or someone loses a family member, or something like that. Sometimes even having a baby, that could be a life change, that could cause depression because you're having to contend with these big changes that are going around, and sometimes if a person feels like they don't have enough resources to mitigate whatever changes are happening, that could cause a slump.
We have a problem of peer pressure amongst young women. Can we say that that's one of the causes of depression? You know, how we find that we are following trends and we are following this, you know, how people walk, how people talk, what people quote, what people drive. You know, there's that problem. Do you think that that peer pressure can also be a cause?
Definitely, definitely. And I'm thinking even in our age of social media, where you have full access to other people's lives, where you're seeing these good parts, it could bring a certain aura of comparison where you compare your life with what seems like are the lives of others, you know, and perhaps it could incite feelings of, you know, maybe I'm not doing enough. Maybe I'm not enough. You know, you look at, say, a friend that you went to school with, and they're rocking the latest labels, and their life seems like it's going a certain trajectory. And you compare it with yours. Sometimes it creates a feeling of stuckness for some people, and that could cause depression.
That could cause depression. Still on that about young women. It's a very interesting area.
Yes.
Healing a sister. Now, there's also that of relationships, not just our partners and romantic relationships, but also with our friendships. Is there something there? You know, broken relationships. You know, trying to have relationships. You know, do we have a problem with that, especially amongst women?
Definitely.
That leads to depression.
Definitely. I could tell you, like, I think in every given day, more than half of the people that walk into my office for a consultation would be issues of relationship, issues of sadness, surrounding relationships or anger and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And you are right, you know, whether the relationships are platonic or romantic, you know, it goes without saying that relationships are important, an important part of our lives, especially as sisters. And I'm thinking, I think by virtue of being human, we're exposed to things, suffering, essentially.
Yeah.
And so what that does is it tends to ooze into relationships where, you know, you're a broken person in a relationship with a broken person, right? Or a healing person in relationship with a healing person. And I think by virtue of that, you might find that there's going to be some friction that occurs one way or another. And for a lot of our young people, I think relationships tend to leave scars. In the same light, I think they can be healing still, depending on the types of dynamics that exist.
Yeah, you know, we've spoken about just a couple of some of these causes. There's also one, you know, how we're raised already, family, the family sect. What kind of impact does that have?
You know, family plays a foundational role in how you perceive yourself and the world.
That's true.
Right? Have you ever heard the saying, sometimes hurt people hurt people?
Hurt people, yeah. I've heard it so many times.
And I'm wondering, if you look at a lot of our families today, you know, how the devil has infiltrated that sort of space. There's a lot of brokenness and hurt that exists, where you find parents, you know, want to do their best, want to raise their children to the best of their abilities, but they sometimes then, without intentionally wanting to do it, pass on hurt to their kids, you know. I think one of the most interesting definitions of depression, actually, in relation to family systems.
Hold on to that thought, Togo. And when we come back, we'll continue to talk about the causes of, you know, this mental disorder, depression. We'll see you just now. Welcome back to Heal a Sister. We're still talking about depression, and in studio, I'm still here with Thokozani. And before the break, Thokozani, we were talking about the family aspect when we talk about the causes of depression.
Yes.
You're about to wrap up on that point.
So before the break, I was going to say, family really does impact a person's ability to function and move through the world.
Yeah.
Right. And I wanted to share in a definition of depression as per one of the theoretical frameworks that exist within the field of psychology, right? And so, typically, let's say parent figures are there to provide love, care, support, and all of these wonderful things that a parent should. And sometimes, because we're talking about how people, how parents sometimes hurt kids. So if, say, parent hurts kid in whether it's berating them, whether it's cycles of abuse, whether it's in whatever capacity, sometimes what happens is then the mind has a hard time reconciling those two facts, because how can a loving, caring, supportive parent be the same parent that's hurting kid? And then what ends up happening is something that's called introjection. So introjection is it's like a fancy term for self-blame. So where kid says, oh, if parent is behaving like this to me, therefore I'm the problem. Therefore I need to be, and sometimes it ends up in very punishment-like behaviors for the kid, and so you find the kid ends up, not the kid, whoever,
Yeah.
ends up then having the negative self-talk, being highly critical of themselves. You tell them, hey, you're so wonderful, that I could never, because in their minds, they're the cause of the unease or the hurt they're feeling.
Lastly, Toko, I'd like to talk also about, as we try to derive and come to conclusion about the causes. I think also let's talk about the cause. Let's bring faith into it.
Right.
Is there a cause of depression there? And also from a professional perspective, from the perspective of a psychologist, does faith have or contribute towards helping the individual?
I think faith is a very important part of people, and it plays very heavily in this topic that we're talking about of depression. It can go both ways, I think. Faith has certain expectations that person feels they need to fulfill, I think. And sometimes a failure to then meet those expectations then results in, feeling like, oh, okay, then maybe I'm bad, maybe I don't deserve such and such and such, and feeling like there's no hope, there's no redemption there's no good that could be found inwards, and I think that could perpetuate then the depression. You find very many instances of people that have, say, stumbled in what they thought they had to do. A young lady gets pregnant, for example, or someone gets caught stealing, and for them it feels like, because I've done this bad thing, therefore I am bad, therefore, and it sort of then spirals down into
sadness,
extreme sadness, feeling like, oh, there's no hope that can come out of this space. And I think in the same light, even when you look at the Bible, there's a lot of people that were depressed. You look at Elijah, you look at Job, and so forth, and you find God's redemptive power, coming up and holding them with his right hand. I think faith can be an avenue that offers a chance for redemption, a chance for healing and restoration, where you have this Redeemer that sort of takes the things that are bad and cleanses them.
Oh, you remind me of the text, John 16:33. Says, "I have told you these things so that you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world." You know, it's so comforting to know that, you know, we have a God that's so confident that He's overcome the world, that He brings healing with Him. You know, as you continue to talk about the faith aspect, I'd like for us to also bring the kind of examples that exist that cause depression in our community.
That's a good question. I think sometimes in the faith, there are unreasonable expectations about, you know, how person should be. Right? And it then becomes a thing of, you know, feeling like, you know how in the Bible there were the Pharisees that would keep the law to the tittle, you know, to the letter, you know.
Now, as we continue to talk about depression in the faith, is there stigma? And I wish you could also extend it to stigma also in our society, besides just our communities. The stigma in depression, in this great sadness.
Definitely, definitely. There's a lot of stigma that exists with having depression. Remember, depression is a psychological condition, right? It's a sign that you're not well psychologically. And I know I'm working in eggshells when I say that. And so what that means is, you know, it's I think unlike physical ailments where you can say, hey, I have a knee ache or my back aches or I have whatever, there's a certain backlash that comes with, you know, knowing that someone has depression. I think for some people it could be, oh, they have depression. Does that mean now they're crazy?
They're crazy. Yeah,
Does that mean they're losing their mind? Does it mean now they're suicidal and they're drinking pills or whatever that could be? And there's a big spectrum of how depression can present itself, you know. And I think sometimes when you have only like just one idea of what it could look like, you know, it creates a shame of, oh, but if I were to say that I have this, would people still see me as competent enough to serve, as competent enough to be around? Or it could be a thing of where people would want to avoid, or people would walk around in eggshells to sort of say, oh no, you know, this one is a glass, and they don't treat you now like you're human.
So it affects so many areas. It affects you personally. It affects even your ministry. It affects your family. It affects everything.
It does.
You know, what kind of practical tips do you have that you'd like to give to the viewer about how to deal with depression?
I think first and foremost, as a practitioner in this space, I really encourage all the viewers, if they suspect that they might have depression, to seek professional advice to sort of determine whether they have depression or if it's something else.
Yeah.
Because it's quite easy to self-diagnose, and you look at a circle and then you find a corner. I don't know if that makes sense, right? Find things where they're not there. So I think to get the right treatment and the right care, please do visit a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a registered counselor, or anyone within that space. And I think beyond that, you know, there's a New Start program that speaks to holistic health, and I think it's a wonderful program that incorporates a lot of the parts that could help in dealing with depression, right? It speaks to nutrition, it speaks to exercise and drinking water and air and rest and sunlight and temperance and trust in God. And I think those are fundamentally things that really do help with depression. If you remember from the Bible, when Elijah was depressed and God took him out into the wilderness and he gave him some food and he said, hey, listen, take a nap.
Yeah.
Essentially. And that, I think, if you look at it, it's God made us, and I think he understands then how to get us out of suffering and out of the things that ail us, right? And so I think in treating depression, you want to take a holistic look at things, And I think another important thing that could help alleviate depression could be the things of having conversations. Often you find because people that are depressed tend to isolate themselves and feel like it ends up feeling like they're the only ones experiencing these heavy emotions. But if you have a community of people around you,
great social network, a supportive network.
Exactly. If you have that, you can have people that can share their experiences with depression or other things that they've struggled with, and that could incite hope, and that could incite a knowing that, hey, listen, there is life beyond this. I can ask God to get me out of this slump.
Yeah. I like to add that it's also prayer.
Yes.
It's also prayer. It's also reading scripture.
Yep.
It's important to be consistent with that as well. There's so much more that we can unpack from depression,
Yes.
about depression. Thank you so much, Tako,
You're
for being here with us and allowing God to use you in such a mighty, mighty way. And we continue to hope that your ministry will be successful. Thank you for watching. And thank you for joining us today on the episode on depression. Remember that there's hope through faith. Get checked as in go and see, go to a health facility and find out if this is a problem that you might have. And remember to get help. Remember to get good supportive networks. Until we see you again next time.